Hi everybody and welcome to Heel Heat. My name is George Coles, and on this episode we're talking about the devil. And no, I'm not talking about the one from religion. I'm talking about the devil in AEW, the biggest what if currently in pro wrestling. And by the time this video is released and edited, we may see the devil just a few hours later at Full Gear, and the reveal may happen there. It may not. You may be watching this after he's revealed. I'm going to talk about the most likely suspects, some fantasy booking ideas, and where I think everybody stands as potentially being the devil. First up, we're going to go with the very obvious one, the one that I think will almost certainly be the devil, and that's Adam Cole, baby! Yes, it's the most obvious, but just because it's the most obvious does not mean it's the wrong decision. Him aligning with the Kingdom, being the devil and a different henchman, makes a ton of sense. It'll make MJF go down a dark path. He finally accepted somebody as a friend, and that friend turned his back on him. What does MJF do? Does he go back to his evil ways? Does he recruit other friends like maybe the Acclaimed? Does he side with Samoa Joe? Does Samoa Joe become a reluctant ally? There's a lot of stories that could go off of this. A lot of questions of what MJF is and who he has become, and how much does that tie back to Adam Cole. Probably the most obvious. I think this has about an 80% chance of happening. All the rest of the things that I'm going to mention are much lower percentage that I think they'll happen, but they can. It's possible. The next one, I think this would be the worst option, but I also think it's probably the second most likely, and that's Jack Perry being the devil. I've heard it mentioned, and it makes some sense. However, for this story, I don't think Jack Perry is a big enough heel and has enough gravitas behind him to carry this. He could put an interesting group behind him with, let's say, Wardlow, maybe Angelo Parker and Matt Menard. You know, some guys that are just there but ain't really doing much right now, especially since leaving the JAS. I think this might be the worst of the most likely, if that makes sense. Out of the things that I could see happening, I think this is the worst option. I don't think the fans would react positively to this. I think this would not go over very well. I do think it has a very good chance of happening. Next up, this is probably one of the more rumored options for the devil, and that's Britt Baker. And it seems to mostly tie with this picture here, which is a still shot from the Doja Cat song that they play over the women of AEW, and specifically when they get to the part where it goes, "She's a devil," Britt Baker throws up the horns. A lot of people point to that as maybe a clue. I don't know. It's a pop song. They're all dancing to it. Does that mean that Nyla Rose could be the devil, or Toni Storm, or Saraya, or any of the other women in the video? I don't think so. Obviously, she has the Adam Cole connection, and maybe they play that up that she's now with the Kingdom because they're trying to weed out MJF because MJF is doing bad things to Adam Cole. He's changing who Adam Cole is. It's possible. I don't see it happening now. Now, out of the ones that I think are most probable, I think this would be the most exciting one and the best option, and that's probably not going to happen, but I think there's a small chance it could, and that's CM Punk becoming the devil. And a lot of this is predicated off the fact that CM Punk seems to be leaning into the rumors of him being at Survivor Series, rumors of him being revealed as the devil. He's even posted video where he was dressed up as the devil from a Hell in a Cell match back in his WWE days. This is where I'm thinking on this. We go back to that quote which he made in Ring of Honor, which MJF made back to him, which is an old parable that goes back decades, and it basically goes like this. The greatest trick the devil ever pulled was convincing the world he didn't exist. What if the greatest trick that CM Punk ever pulled was convincing the smart fans that he got fired and him and Jack Perry had an incident? What if that was all a work? What if they worked all of the internet news sites? I know it's probably not possible, but as a fan, tell me you wouldn't love to see that. That level of storytelling, that level of dedication, how great would that be if that was the facts? He could even have Jack Perry in his group. That would be insane in my opinion. Obviously, if it's Punk, you're probably going to get FTR, probably Wardlow in my opinion being there. I don't think it's the most probable, but I wouldn't 100% rule it out. With them having TV rights and the ratings seeming to go down to very poor and almost half of what they were for Collision when he was there. I think they might pull the trigger and bring him back, even if everything he did was true. Now we're going to go on to a couple other ones that I've seen rumors for, but I don't really think are going to be who it is, but we're going to address them. First one being David Finley, obviously accompanied by members of the Bullet Club. I don't see this working for a couple of reasons. First, you'd immediately have two Bullet Club factions that are on the heel side in the same company that have a built-in beef with each other. Also, I'm going to be perfectly honest, I don't think David Finley is on the level of the Devil, MJF himself. In a feud with MJF, I think David Finley sadly would be made to look very negatively, in my opinion. I don't think this is going to happen. It's possible, especially with their connection with New Japan. Not probable, but there is a possibility. Next up, Mercedes Monae. I just don't see this happening because she has no connection with MJF, other than maybe she just wants to come in and take over the company. Obviously, she has ties with some people that may have issue with MJF, FTR, Sean Spears going back to the NXT days. Obviously, Spears and FTR have been in groups with MJF before and may have bones to pick with him. Her being the one to orchestrate that, maybe that calls for MJF to make a call to someone like Britt Baker to stand up for him to fight against Mercedes Monae. I don't know. Her name would carry the surprise. I just can't see it happening. Next up, another rumored one, who's also rumored to be one of the big reveals, also with Mercedes Monae, possibly at Full Gear, which, again, is going to be just a few hours from when this releases. Will Osprey. Again, I don't think this works for a couple different reasons. I think the Devil needs to have a tie to MJF in some way, some shape, or some form. I don't think Osprey has enough of a tie there. I don't think there's enough there to make it important. Now, can they write a good story with Osprey as the Devil? Yeah, and do I think a feud between Osprey and MJF would be fantastic? I think they would have some great banger matches. I think we'd have some good promos against each other. I don't know that he works as the Devil. Now, this next one, I heard on Steven Larson's Going in Raw podcast, which is probably my favorite wrestling podcast. They are just honest and fair and usually have a positive spin on pro wrestling and the goings-on around pro wrestling. They brought up that one of their fans, and I don't think they credited the person, mentioned this. And that would be the Elite are the ones behind the Devil, being Kenny Omega, Adam Cole, the Young Bucks, and Adam Page. And they even said it, and I had the same thought when they mentioned it. Would that be like another rehashing of the NWO? Basically, the Elite turning and becoming part of Bullet Club with Jay White's Bullet Club Gold. And I kind of thought that as well. They'd be like NWO 2000, if you remember. It was great on paper, but there was too many iterations of the NWO at that point for it to be important. I do think, though, the more I think about this, the more it makes a lot of sense. The Bucks have turned heel. Page could be led down a dark path with his feud with Swerve Strickland to where it takes him back to the dark side, makes him go back to that heel that first gained him popularity. Kenny Omega's best work was as the Cleaner. That's where most wrestling fans grew to love him and grew to think he was one of the best wrestlers in the world. I've always liked Kenny better as a heel, as a cocky, arrogant heel that knows he's better than everyone. There's a lot of stories that could branch out from it. The power struggles within the Bullet Club between Omega and Jay White, who've had issues in the past. Adam Cole always looking to be a leader. Even back to the original days when he was in Bullet Club, he tried to overthrow Omega as the leader. There would be some interesting storylines. The more I think about it, the more interesting it is. I don't know that they're going to go that route, but they could, and it could be really fun. Now, the next one. If we want AEW to have their higher power, it was me, Austin. It was me all along moment, Tony Khan is the Devil. And this is where I'm going to do a little bit of fantasy booking, because here's the grouping I think that Tony Khan would have with it. First, you'd have Christopher Daniels, who we know works behind the scenes closely with Tony Khan. He's the head of talent relations. Then we'd also have Sean Spears, who has ties again to MJF, much like we said earlier, who can be bitter and jaded because he was one of the first big-name free agent signings that didn't ever really get traction in AEW, and the wild card to this, Joey Janela. And it could be all Joey Janela's idea. And here's the reasoning. Let's go back to 2019, the beginnings of All Elite Wrestling. We had Chris Jericho, we had the Young Bucks, we had Kenny Omega. Who were some of the stars that also had a buzz around them during that start time? Christopher Daniels and SCU, they made the jump from Ring of Honor. SCU was a very hot act at the time. Christopher Daniels has seen his role on screen diminished in AEW. Spears, like I just mentioned, a big free agent signing. He's not had the impact that he probably should have there. And Joey Janela. Remember, very early on, Joey Janela had a main event match against Kenny Omega and was looked at possibly being a main event star for the company. Now here's a story I would write off of that. Janela gets back in Tony Khan's ear and mentions all the time that he wasted giving MJF the money he wanted, the airtime he wanted, the opportunities he wanted, and MJF is still talking about possibly leaving in a few months. Whereas Joey Janela never had an issue, was willing to work dark, was willing to work elevation, didn't care where he was as long as he was on the card, was a good soldier, and never got his chance. Same with Spears, same with Christopher Daniels. They get into Tony Khan's ear. Tony Khan says, you know what, you're right. I wasted all this time building MJF and building my company around MJF. These are the guys I should have put it behind. These are the guys that were loyal. Hell, Joey Janela is loyal to me after I let him go. That's why I back these guys. And now you have that evil authority figure, which I know is a trope that's been done to death, but it might be interesting with a different group. I don't think it's going to happen, but I like the idea. And last but not least, my most controversial fantasy booking, and the one I think would get the most genuine heat and negative reaction in a positive way, the guy that could be the biggest heel in the history of AEW, the devil is Jim Cornette. Now, if you're a big wrestling fan, you follow wrestling on Twitter, you listen to Jim Cornette's podcast, you see the interactions between different AEW members and Jim Cornette, you know that to the AEW fans, the diehards, Jim Cornette is public enemy number one. His negative takes on everyone from Kenny Omega to the Young Bucks to Tony Khan himself all have drawn the ire of AEW fans. Now think about that. In a world where most of the fans that watch the product are smart, how do you get the smart fans to boo? You bring in a guy they really hate. You bring in Jim Cornette. Now I don't think Jim Cornette would ever do this. He's said so much himself on his podcast that he's never going to be a full-time manager or involved in wrestling on a full-time basis ever again. He would be interesting because he's mentioned he'd like to manage FTR at least once, which you could put in his group. And here's where the really big piece of the puzzle comes in. Along with Jim Cornette, you bring in Alexander Hammerstone, and now you have some, because Hammerstone by himself may not pull off the devil, but Hammerstone with Cornette telling the backstory of Hammerstone, Holiday, MJF coming up on the indies together through MLW, MJF leaving them for greener pastures, Hammerstone getting left behind to be a big fish in a little pond while MJF becomes a millionaire. Holiday got sick. They could spin the story that MJF never even went back to see his old friend, and now Hammerstone's there to seek revenge for not only himself being left behind by MJF, but for Richard Holiday as well. And with Jim Cornette telling that story, you make Hammerstone more important than just Hammerstone doing that himself. I think it'd be very interesting. I'd love to see something like that. I do think, as problematic as Jim Cornette is at times, I also think he's one of the most genius wrestling minds that are still alive today. I mean, the only people I could think that would rival him are Vince McMahon himself, Paul Heyman, maybe Eric Bischoff, Bill Watts if you want to go very old school. But there's not that many people with the wrestling mind that Jim Cornette has. I know it's never going to happen. There's a negative 1 billion% chance this will happen, but I do think it would be interesting. Overall, I do think it's going to be Adam Cole. Like I said, I think there's about an 80% chance it is Adam Cole. I don't see anything that points to anyone other than him realistically, even though we're getting a lot of MacGuffins, which I like. It keeps you guessing. It allows us to make videos like this. I do think it's going to be Adam Cole. Let me know who you think it's going to be. Give me two answers. I want to know who you think it's going to be, and who you would like to see it be. They don't necessarily have to be the same person. Let me know down here in the comments. While you're there, smash that like button, share the video, subscribe if you haven't. If you see where it says join, that's how you become a member. Becoming a member definitely would help out the channel. With all that being said, my name is George Coles, and this has been another Heel Heat video.